Hello and welcome to the invisible art of content architecture. Here's what you can expect in the next 20 minutes or so. We'll start with a quick introduction. I'll tell you a few words about myself and the company I represent. Then we'll set the context with the content story. We'll then define a new area of specialization called content architecture and define the role in charge of that called content architect. We'll then dive into each one of the 8 areas of responsibilities of a content architect. And we'll finally wrap that up with 4 ultimate goals of every content architect. So let's jump right in. My name is Vasily Fomichev and I'm a Senior Director of Solution Architecture at Altudo. I've been a Sitecore MVP for the past 6 years and I've been honored to receive the title in 3 categories: Technology, Commerce, and Ambassador. I've been working with Sitecore for over the past 12 years, and for the past 6 years I managed several Sitecore practices. At heart, I'm really a MarTech enthusiast, and I've been spending quite a bit of time lately working with Azure, with artificial intelligence, and blockchain. I represent the company called Altudo, and we are a global digital marketing and technology agency focused on creating data-driven, personalized experiences. As most full-service digital agencies would cover off on the 3 major pillars and provide a full spectrum of services across marketing, experience orchestration, and technology. However, what sets us apart is being data-driven. What that means is while other partners may lead with case studies and theory, we lead with live and real-time data. So when you hear Altudo, what I'd like you to think of is data-driven customer experience. Now, we are a Platinum Sitecore partner, and we have delivered over 500 successful Sitecore projects. We have over 250 Sitecore subject matter experts on staff, and this year we were honored to receive 4 MVP awards in Ambassador, Technology, and Strategy categories, which speaks to our diversified specialization. Well, let's jump into the content story. And what a better way to set that off than with a quote from Marcus Sheridan: "Great content is the best sales tool in the world." And that speaks to content marketing. Content is king and has been king for a long time. In fact, content marketing's roots go as far as the late 19th century. What is content marketing anyway? Well, content marketing is the type of marketing that is concerned with creating and sharing content that doesn't explicitly focus or advertise a particular brand, but rather stimulates interest and demand for that brand's products or services. Some of the earlier examples of content marketing go as far as late 1900s with the magazine called The Furrow. The magazine was started by the brand that's still around today called John Deere. That brand is still specializing in farming equipment. Back then, the idea behind The Furrow was that by writing compelling stories on topics around the farming industry and also providing recommendations for solving problems using equipment produced by John Deere, the company aimed to stimulate the sales of their products. Another early example of content marketing is the Michelin Guide by the company Michelin that we still know today that produces tires. The first Michelin Guide came out in 1900, and the goal of the release was to stimulate interest for automobile travel. Michelin figured if they could stimulate that interest, people would drive their cars more frequently by traveling more, therefore use their tires more frequently, and therefore would come back to them for a replacement set more often. So as the content channels continued evolving, as technology continued growing, so did content marketing. In fact, recently with technological advancements, content and content marketing entered what I call a content explosion phase. So with that explosion, the role of content marketing in marketers' arsenal became ever more important. How important? Let's take a look at some numbers. 65% of marketers spend more time designing and creating content than any other activity in digital campaigns. 60% of marketers create at least one piece of content each day. A whopping 93% of B2B marketers use content marketing. 40% of budget is spent on content marketing by most successful B2B marketers. And finally, 42% of companies have hired a designated content strategist executive. Now, a C-level position for content marketing space. Now, with the content explosion, content marketing started going through a series of challenges. Here are the top 6 challenges that we see nowadays. It is becoming harder and harder to stand out in the ever-growing and increasingly growing amount of content produced daily. Interactive content that is getting traction and popularity is increasingly hard to manage. Content produced on a daily basis is becoming of higher quality, and that higher quality generates an increase in overhead in managing those assets. An explosion in digital channels provides a unique challenge of having to format content specifically for each channel. On top of that, we're facing a challenge of staying consistent with our marketing messaging across all the distribution channels. And finally, the variety of digital channels and content types and formats created a need for a large number of specialized talent, which in turn resulted in the final 6th challenge of company silos and issues with communication. So how do we fix all of these problems? How do we mitigate the risk and lower the cost generated by all of these complexities and concerns, yet still meet the demand of today's content consumers? Well, let's take a closer look at the problem and break it down. So when we talk about the content can be sourced from various channels. In fact, it could come from a system like an ERP or from a third-party agency producing content, copywriting services, advertising, and other media services. And what we really want to do is take that content and distribute it across all of our channels, whether it's on or offline. Well, up until the content explosion, it's been a simple task. We would simply integrate those sources of content with the distribution channel and manage it directly at the system dedicated for each channel. So for instance, we would integrate the ERP with the CMS, import content from the ERP into the CMS platform, add a little additional massaging to that content, and publish it to the web channel. Now, with the increasing number of distribution channels, the number of distribution platforms started growing. And being able to maintain that content distribution at each individual channel, at the level of each individual platform, became increasingly demanding. Some brands try to fix that problem by repurposing some of the platforms, some of the edge platforms, for distributing certain types of content across other distribution channels. So for instance, using a CMS platform to not only distribute content for the web, but also for mobile apps and potentially, let's say, POS systems. However, brands quickly realized that these channel-specific systems were not a good fit for managing various types of content. So all of these various systems started becoming individual sources of truth for their specific type of content. And that created a challenge of managing all of the content types across all the channels. And that really wasn't a problem until recently. So now that we have the complexities around the content formats, digital channels, and a long list of systems that we need to distribute our content to, how do we reduce the cost around that type of syndication? Well, the answer is in bringing content back, pulling content creation and management from the channel into the middle office, into the area right between the source and the distribution. What we need to do is create a space that can take the content source, the raw content or the input, aggregate it, provide planning tools for managing content lifecycle, provide the collaboration tools for all the stakeholders involved in the content creation, content management tools for various types of content, and of course, a way to format each piece of content in the right format and publish it out to all the distribution channels. Now, this is the area that is now being called content architecture. This is a new area of specialization that was given birth by the increasing complexities and challenges around the content story. Content architecture deals with issues around content lifecycle management, content compliance, content performance, communications amongst the content stakeholders, workflows around areas related to content, specific channel formatting, content accessibility, and of course, technology. But wait a minute, you may say, don't we already have an area that manages content structure called information architecture? And you're right. However, there is a big difference. Information architecture is concerned with providing the right information to the right user at the edge. So it's highly dependent on the requirements of specific channel. In other words, information architecture will be different for each individual distribution channel. While content architecture is more of a back office or middle office task that's concerned with creating content in channel agnostic manner and then would integrate with channels for content distribution. So who would be in charge of this new area of specialization? Whoever that person is, that person needs to have content expertise. Now, we do have content producers who are experts in their area of content production. However, they lack the other two knowledge areas, technology and marketing. Now, we do have technology specialists in system architecture, specialists in platforms and platform integrations. However, they lack the knowledge around the content story and the complexities and the intricacies around managing content lifecycle. On the other end, we have marketers who know content story at a high level, however, lack the technology background. So that creates an opportunity for a new role that would have the extensive knowledge of content lifecycle and the content story, yet be well versed in marketing as well as technology, and that new role is a content architect. Now, content architect is concerned with 8 primary areas of responsibility. And those areas include content lifecycle design, content modeling, metadata, syndication and formatting, content compliance, content performance, content security, and of course, technology. So let's dive into each one of these in more detail. Starting with the content lifecycle design. The most important thing to keep in mind about the content lifecycle is that it's not a linear process. It has been for a long time because of the simplicity of the content story. However, with the evolving and increasing complexities and the technology and content explosion, this process is no longer linear. And what it turned into is what we call the creative chaos. The process may start off as a linear process, but then the deliverables start getting bounced around, going from one stakeholder to the next, potentially several times, creating a mesh and the increasing demand for collaboration communication tools. And there is absolutely no problem with that. This is the nature of the creative process, and we call this creative chaos. So when considering the content lifecycle and defining the content lifecycle, what we need to do is avoid trying to fit that cycle into a linear process. Stay away from that pitfall, but rather create a space that can facilitate and nurture this creative process called creative chaos. Once we've defined the content lifecycle, we need to start looking at content modeling. And if you're coming from a technology background, this may look familiar to you, and it may look similar to what's called an entity relationship diagram in the database world. The biggest difference here is content modeling is much more flexible and fluid. While technology and system content modeling is generally relatively rigid, content modeling has to be flexible because the content story continuously changes based on distribution channels, format, changing the requirements per channel, and changing supported content types. So our model needs to be extensible, flexible, and scalable. We should also define a sustainable taxonomy structure that's capable of supporting the most intricate relationship types with the incrementally growing content. Now, once we've defined our structure, the next thing that we need to do is organize our content. Here's a tip for you. The secret of organizing massive amounts of content is improper packaging. What that refers to is metadata. Metadata is additional information about a piece of content that's stored with or embedded inside that content item. There are generally three types of metadata. Relational, that defines relationships for the content type and how that specific content item fits in amongst all the other raw content in the content hub. Contextual metadata refers to the usage, the past usage or the present usage of this specific content item in campaigns and channel distribution. And finally, descriptive metadata, and that's the metadata we're mostly used to. That's the information around content creation, creation date, modification date, author, and so forth. Once we're finished with defining and packaging our content, we need to start looking at syndication and formatting. And as an architect, the most important step here is to define distribution channels and formatting requirements for each content type for each channel. So what we need to do is create a map of all the available content types combined with individual channel formatting requirements. To give a specific example, we could have an image that could have a requirement for print and a completely different formatting requirement for a different file format, much lower resolution, much lighter weight for a web distribution channel. Once we've completed the syndication process, we need to start looking at other processes around the content lifecycle. And there are generally three types. The lifecycle workflow, governing the content lifecycle from creation to archival. Then there is a content processing workflow that is concerned with overseeing the process of content transformation or formatting, most frequently specific to digital channels. And finally, the syndication workflow. This is the workflow that we're used to from the web story that's concerned with governing the general content publishing approval process. Now, the next area that a content architect needs to look into is security. And there are three primary areas inside the security track: digital right management, internal access security, and public access security. With increasing technological advancements, new technology, software, and hardware made it very easy to copy and distribute content without respect for digital rights. So as a content architect, your primary job will be, and the most time around the security track will be spent around managing digital rights and public access to content. And that brings us to the final and eighth area of responsibility, which is technology. As a content architect, you would of course be defining the systems that would participate in the content lifecycle. Of course, those systems would need customizations, so you would need to be familiar with the inner workings of each platform. As we already saw, there are multiple content source channels and multiple distribution channels. So there's no way around integrations. In fact, platform integrations is a cornerstone of the technology track in content architecture. And finally, the more tasks we can automate, the better. In fact, the fewer platform customizations that we have to do, the fewer custom integrations, and the more automation the platform provides, the better choice it is for us. So ultimately, as a content architect, we have 4 goals. We want to provide a flexible and scalable architecture to facilitate change. Change is the only constant in the content world, and it is a frequent constant. We want to enable our stakeholders with accessible and usable tools. If it's not usable, might as well not exist. We want to allow streamlined content intake, production, and distribution. Seamless. And finally, we want to provide a holistic view of content We want to provide insights around content lifecycle, as well as content effectiveness from distribution channels to activate data-driven marketing decisions. So when all four of these goals are met, content architect's job is invisible. And if you are a business stakeholder listening to this session right now, and if you're having a problem in one of these areas, who you need is a content architect. Thank you. If you have any questions about the presentation or around content architecture or content cycle or content hub, feel free to reach out to me directly by emailing to vasily.fomichev@altudo.co. Reach out to me directly on social channels, LinkedIn or Twitter, or through altudo.co or cmsbestpractices.com. Thank you very much for your time.